be mindful of our families back home as we deliberate in the better interest of the people we serve for the whole Northwest Territories, and give us strength and guidance in our decision-making authorities over our last number of days in this government. Must see.
Thank you. Seated. Committee, there's an agenda before us. Any other items to discuss? Hearing none, can I get a motion to adopt the agenda? Mr. Natalie, all in favor? Motion carried. The agenda is adopted. Declarations of conflict of interest. Hearing none, we'll move into today's item of business, public clause-by-clause review of Bill 54, Standard Interest Rate Statutes Amendment Act, with the Honourable Robert C. MacLeod, Minister of Finance. I'll begin this meeting by asking members to introduce themselves for the record, starting with Mr. Simpson.
R.J. Simpson, MLA, Hay River North.
Good evening, welcome. Michael Natalie, MLA for Detroit.
Good evening, Danny McNeely, Statute.
Hi, good evening, welcome. Herb Nakamak from the Nakput.
And I am Kieran Tester, the member for Cam Lake and chair of the Standing Committee on Government Operations. With me at the table are Ms. Jennifer Frankie-Smith, Committee Clerk, Ms. April Taylor, Committee Research Advisor, and Ms. Sheila McPherson, Law Clerk of the Legislative Assembly. This evening, the Standing Committee on Government Operations is holding a public clause-by-clause review of Bill 54, Standard Interest Rate Statutes Amendment Act. Bill 54, sponsored by the Department of Finance, amends various statutes, each of which has its own fixed interest rate for overdue receivables, to adopt a single variable interest rate prescribed under the Financial Administration Act. This standard interest rate will apply to all overdue accounts owing to the Government of the Northwest Territories, including general accounts receivable, property tax, tobacco tax, payroll tax, fuel tax, and insurance tax. Bill 54 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on June 4th, 2019, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Government Operations for review. Committee supports this bill, which will set the standard interest rate for overdue accounts at the Bank of Canada key benchmark interest rate, plus 3%. This will have the effect of lowering the interest rate on overdue general receivables and overdue payroll taxes from 18% to the current 4.75%. Similarly, it will reduce the interest rate on overdue property taxes in the general taxation area from 15%, and it will reduce the interest rate on overdue tobacco taxes from 12% to the current 4.75%. This will simplify administration for the GNWT and encourage the timely payment of outstanding debts to the GNWT. Committee will not be proposing amendments to Bill 54. There are copies of the bill available at the back of the room. And I will now invite the Honourable Minister of Finance to introduce himself and his staff for the record and proceed with any opening remarks that you may have. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, Committee. I'm here to present Bill 54, Standard Interest Rate Statute Amendment Act. With me today is the Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. David Sturt, Deputy Secretary to the Financial Management Board, Jamie Cui, Legislative Counsel, Sherry J. Rock, as well as my Ministerial Special Advisor, Mr. Rob Hollinson. Bill 54 would make legislative amendments to adopt a standard interest rate that would be applied to all GNWT overdue receivables. This proposal would lower the interest rate charged on receivables while linking the interest rate charged to the Canadian economy and monetary policy. Currently, the interest rate applied under the Financial Administration Act and all taxation legislation varies, creating an administratively complex situation leading to confusion for NWT residents and companies doing business with the GNWT. This legislation will ensure a standard interest rate is applied. That concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chair. At this time, I'm prepared to answer any questions that committee may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Does committee have any general comments or questions before we begin our clause-by-clause review? Mr. McNeely.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My only comments to this bill is I think it's a very good piece of legislation on both sides. It improves the administration of this organization, and it reduces the cost burden onto our residents in paying large amounts of interest costs of their principal owed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. Mr. Minister, did you have a comment?
No, I'll just thank the member for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Anything further from committee? Hearing none, does committee agree to begin our clause-by-clause review of Bill 54, Standard Interest Rate Statutes Amendment Act?
Agreed.
Thank you, committee. We'll defer the title of the bill until the end and begin with consideration of the clauses. There are 6 clauses in the bill. Please turn to page 1. To clause 1, to clause 2, to clause 3, to clause 4, to clause 5, to clause 6. Thank you, committee. We will now return to the bill number and title. Bill 54, Standard Interest Rate Statutes Amendment Act. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Does committee agree that Bill 54, Standard Interest Rate Statutes Amendments Act is now ready for consideration in committee of the whole? Mr. Simpson.
Mr. Chair, I move that Bill 54, Standard Interest Rate Statutes Amendment Act be reported to the Assembly as ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. The motion is in order, and the motion's on the floor. To the motion.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Bill 54, Standard Interest Rate Statutes Amendment Act, will be reported to the Assembly as ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Minister, and thank you to your officials, and thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We are now adjourned.
Thanks, Dave.